Make Sense is a show that engages business thinkers and doers across a broad range of topics, all to help you become more informed and empowered. Wealth, employment, entrepreneurship, taxes, interest rates, and financial freedom all take place in a unique environment called the economy. It's the ocean for the fish and the galaxy for the planets. But why does it receive so much attention? What's so important to pay attention to? Make Sense is the place where we bring the conversations to the forefront. Joining us today to help us understand the basics of our economy and provide insights on how we can make our pockets and businesses better off is Hubert Edwards. Hubert is an accomplished veteran and consultant in the business field. His diverse background ranges from senior roles in public accounting, central banking, commercial banking, and consulting. He continues to be a notable voice on business affairs and a mover and shaker at the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to the show, Mr. Edwards. Just a few questions that we wanted to get started with. From your vantage point, how would you describe the unique features of the Bahamian economy?
I would think the Bahamian economy is unique in terms of the mix between tourism, financial services, for example, and the fact that it maintains a very sharp differentiation between onshore and offshore, or onshore and the domestic economy. If you look around the region, not many economies within the Caribbean and within smaller states have that type of uniqueness. So I think in a very, very fundamental way, it displays a lot of similarities, but in that regard, because it's so sharp, especially because of the interplay with the peg and the Bahamas dollar being pegged to the United States dollar, that creates, I think, a sufficient uniqueness to make it stand out from other jurisdictions.
So in many ways, we do have some similarities, but again, as an archipelago, we do have some uniqueness as well.
Definitely. The archipelagic nature of the Bahamas in and of itself creates differences in how economies work. There are some significant population centers, and there are some which are large enough but not sufficiently significant to drive big commerce. When you compare it to, say, a Jamaica or a Trinidad as oil and gas, but also is significantly dependent on tourism. Jamaica, for example, is dependent on tourism. The Bahamas is significantly dependent on tourism. But these other elements, having multiple islands, multiple environment, if you will, to offer from a touristic point of view, having that overlay of financial services makes it different. It's not something that you readily understand from outside looking in. You have to spend some time studying it to really understand the underlying nuances. And I think it's important for any discussion around economic development or just how the economy operates in general.
Yeah, talking about studying, I mean, from your vantage point, what would you say, or how would you say that the economy behaved over the last few years, and how do you expect it to behave over the short and medium term?
Well, unfortunately, Adrian, the Bahamas economy, the Bahamian economy, has lagged over the last decade. If you look at real GDP growth has been minuscule. The country has, in fact, over the last 10 years been growing at less than 1% per annum, which is, by any stretch of the imagination, anemic. And as a result of, I would say, certain structural issues, certain fundamental things which need to be fixed, the ease of doing business, the cost of energy, the productivity within the country, problems or tensions and adverse pressure from the public sector. These are important issues which need to be fixed going forward. And so as we look into the future, I do not readily expect there to be any fundamental shift unless those areas are changed. So I would think that as we move into 2021 and beyond, without making changes to the culture, to the structural issues within the country, it's not going to be much different. Unfortunately, with the intervention of COVID and with the economic crisis that we are going through, you can expect there to be a lot more I would say, precious, and it's going to be a little bit harder, certainly going forward.
Great, great. I mean, and obviously a lot of information packed in that statement. If I'm kind of a layman and I want to just measure the economy, what would I be looking for?
In standard terms, in conventional terms, you're looking at your GDP. What is the total output of goods and services over usually a 1-year horizon? You can go beyond that, but usually it's measured over a 1-year horizon. We would have seen where the Bahamas in recent time would have had an economy measured by GDP, which is ranging somewhere between 9 billion and 12 billion. The 12 billion emerging right after that adjustment and the addition of VAT and a kind of a more precise measurement of the service size of the industry. So GDP, the measurement is usually looking at the total output of goods and services. That's pretty much where you want to look at it. From a more, I would say, subjective point of view, you would want to really consider maybe the standard of living, misery index, how well persons are surviving, because even though there may be growth in GDP, that growth could be so concentrated that it becomes deceptive. If you use GDP per capita, for example, as a measurement for what the individual may be facing, that could be very, very, very deceptive, because there could be the fact that there are some individuals who are way, way below the poverty line, and you have some individuals who are way outside what the normal statistics is saying to you. And so while we can do the measurement in dollar value, and that is what is standard, I always think that there are some subjective issues which need to be brought into play to really understand what is happening on the ground within the economy.
Right. Speaking about on the ground, I mean, there are basically two factors that we would consider very, very important, right? One would be the individual that has a job or looking for employment, and the business. How would, in your words, you describe those GDP figures, and what does it mean for a business? If I'm an entrepreneur, what does GDP mean to me? And then likewise, if I'm an individual, what does GDP mean for me in terms of employment indicators?
Well, the GDP is an important measure, regardless of the fact that it has, as like all statistics, like all economic measure, there's noise involved in that. But it's an important measure because it's a benchmark which gives you an insight into whether or not the country is growing. So it will tell you whether, based on last year, we're making improvements. If you look at the projections that usually come about during the time of the budget, it says, we expect to grow by 2%. That is important for an entrepreneur. That is important for an individual. If you are on the unemployment line, then certainly you want to know that with robust growth being projected, the possibility of you being employed is going to be increased. As an employer, as an investor, the possibility of you finding new opportunities, you expanding your business, you taking on new projects is always going to be indicative in what information comes out from the GDP. Now, I mentioned earlier the whole idea of measuring via GDP, and this is where I think many times it's important to understand exactly what you are dealing with. Real GDP versus GDP measured in current terms. What I mean by that, let me use a very quick example, Adrian. Let's assume that for our purpose, we have an economy which only sells candy. Mm-hmm. And every year it sells 100 candies for $1 each. The GDP is going to be $100, yeah?
Right.
Let's assume that next year we sell only 75 candies, yeah? But this time the government imposed a tax of 50 cents on each of those candies. The total output for the year in this second instance is going to be $113. Now, when you look at GDP through that lens, you would say, well, the country is expanding. The truth is, in the first year, you made 100 candies. In the second year, you made 75. In real GDP terms, GDP has reduced by 25%. So when an investor, when an entrepreneur, when a business person goes to look at this measure, they must be careful not to only look at it in current terms, but also understand the real GDP terms, because the impact of inflation, the impact of taxation can overstate or can give you the impression that you are beyond where you're supposed to be. But fundamentally, it's a benchmark. It's important in giving you an indication of where you are as a country. It's also important in telling you where the world is going to be. It's important in telling you what performance to expect from some of your main trading partners. That is fundamental for any business in any sector across our economy.
Great, great. Now, you led us on a bit talking about taxations and inflation, but we hear a lot of talk about budget debates. What is a budget debate, and why is it important to us?
Well, the budget debate essentially is usually the current administration presenting what the projections are going to be for the coming year. And usually it forecasts out a couple of years. It's also an important point where policy positions are proffered. It's important because it lays, if you will, a canvas against which growth and development is expected to happen, or it lays the canvas in which the economic business of the country is going to be transacted. So you hear about new taxes, you hear about potential increases, reduction of taxes, concessions which may be available to businesses. The government lays out its priorities during that budget debate. And of course, the opposition then comes along and challenges some of that. And the whole idea should be, in an ideal world, that challenge then helps to refine the policy positions which are there. This don't usually happen. So a lot of times, the administration simply just ignore the opposition and vice versa. But it is important for individuals, the layman, the man on the street, to really follow and understand what is coming out of the budget presentation, because what it says, it speaks to where the country is going to be, and importantly, it identifies potential opportunities that a business or an individual can now start to look at. Like, for example, if all of a sudden the government announces some concessions in a particular sector that you were interested in, then it may become cheaper, may become easier for you to become a new entrant into that sector. And all of a sudden, the barriers to entry reduces for you, or you have an opportunity to scale up your business if you are already in that era. So, the budget presents, I think, an important discussion between government as an administration and the people, the populace, and the business sector, for sure.
Now, outside of the government and its ability to tax and spend and influence policy, are there any other instruments in the economy that can be used to help grow the economy?
Most definitely. The taxation is generally recognized as your fiscal policies, and the government usually have a number of things in its fiscal toolbox. But there's also monetary policy, and monetary policy usually deals with either the supply of money or addressing interest rate. Now, in the Bahamas, because of, I would say, the narrowness of our monetary policy, we don't see a lot of that happening. If you look to a country like our neighbor in the United States, you would see them using a wider range of issues or tools, rather, to drive the economy. Quantitative easing is one of them, which is, in layman terms, printing money. Using aggressive shift in interest rates is another way of doing it. If you look at the United States, for example, right now, I think the reference rate is somewhere between 0 and 0.25%. In the Bahamas, our reference rate is, I think, 4.5 or 4%, which is significantly higher. So yes, there is the ability to use monetary policy. There's the ability to also use macroprudential. And macroprudential is usually where the central bank or a regulator uses its power or uses its regulatory ability to help drive the economy in a particular direction. Let me give you an example. let's say lending is under pressure, it could then ease, the central bank could then ease the requirement of the 45% loan to debt service ratio. And if it reduces that, then the individual has the ability to borrow more. Let's say it takes it from 45% down to 30%. So those are some macroprudential means of kind of opening up and making credit easier. And there are other ways of doing it by either reducing regulations on financial institutions or increasing it if they want to go in the other direction. And there's also moral suasion, where either the central bank, a regulator, or the government itself seeks to convince the country, seeks to convince businesses, seeks to convince certain sectors or grouping that going in a particular direction is going to be beneficial for the country and also beneficial for them. Like, for example, why don't you consider reducing your prices in this area to benefit the consumer? And we may consider looking at in the near to midterm, while we can't do that now, or we can reduce some of the duties on a particular type of goods or a particular class of goods. So there are always other ways of doing that other than raising tax or other than employing fiscal strategies.
Wow, Mr. Edwards, you've given some great insight on those tools and even in defining some of the economic terms that we hear day to day. But I have to ask you, right now we're going through a once in 100-year pandemic. I mean, what's your view that the COVID-19 pandemic may have on our economy?
It's interesting that you say we're going through a once in 100 years. Maybe up to now, but the way things have been shaping up, Adrian, you and I are fully aware that some of these once in 100 years are now coming around every 5 years or so. But we cross our fingers that that may not be so going forward. This pandemic, I think, is significant for the Bahamas. One of the most important takeaway from this is we are dealing with a health crisis which is manifesting itself into a serious economic crisis. And as a result of that, it's unveiling our vulnerabilities on multiple sides. It is showing us the weaknesses of our infrastructure on the health side. It's showing us our weaknesses of our underlying support infrastructure on the social side. How long can we sustain supporting persons who are unemployed, supporting persons who are on the unemployment line or on the food line? And it's also showing us some of the significant weaknesses in our economic arrangement. Like, for example, if we were to continue like this for a long period of time, I would not, let me not guess over what point in time that will happen. But certainly, if we were to go beyond a year, you would easily appreciate the impact that this would have on our external reserves, given the fact that almost 100% of our inflow, our foreign exchange inflow from tourism is totally gone. So I would think that one of the big lessons and one of the big takeaway from this particular economic impact is that we must now start to address those vulnerabilities. Many of the structural weaknesses existed before. We cannot pretend that this is not so, but in many ways, this COVID-19, this economic crisis that we're going through is presenting us with multiple opportunities to relook at our economy, opportunities to rethink our economy, opportunities to understand where our vulnerabilities lie, and most importantly, the fact that we can no longer depend solely on one sector to drive the well-being of our country, because when that goes, there's going to be significant pain to be borne by the general populace. So I think there is on one side pain, there's also on the other side learning. But that learning will only come if we choose to listen and act accordingly.
So Edwards, this is a great points again. I mean, for a lot of us, pain and learning has come all too soon. There are some businesses that literally may be starting over, may have not had an income or a revenue base for the last, since March. And there are persons whose life savings may be gone. Where do you see those opportunities to reverse the pain in the near and the long term?
Well, the honest truth is it's going to be challenging going forward. But the one thing I would say to any business or any individual out there is that you must be positive and you must be ready to start over, ready and willing. The opportunities presented by the government through especially the SBDC program, I think is one area, especially for small businesses, which need to be, persons need to take opportunity of. You have to actively go out there and grab onto these. There's also opportunities for moving into other sectors. We mentioned that earlier. Food security has emerged as one of the biggest topic for discussion, not only here in the Bahamas, right across the region and around the world. Here is where it can benefit the Bahamas. The Bahamas buys, I think, somewhere close to maybe $1 billion in imports, maybe around food and stuff. If we can start producing more of the food that we consume on an ongoing basis, that's a good way of reducing that market. Therefore, there are opportunities for individuals who want to go into agriculture or who want to go into some agri-production. There are also opportunities for what I think is the inevitable, where there must be diversification within the tourism sector itself, where we are looking at linkages, whether it's through the orange economy and persons want to grab onto that. We want to diversify more around Airbnb. We want to diversify more around ecotourism and leveraging the archipelagic nature of the Bahamas for greater gain. And then, of course, there's also the most definitive era which jumped out as a result of this crisis, and that is the digital sector. Persons are looking for opportunities. Persons are looking for solutions in new challenges in value chain management, coding, developing apps, and so on. And digitization is a big area. So while the fact of the matter is that there may be challenge finding finances, and there may be challenge putting the money you need together very quickly. If we can bring ideas and capital, which may be resident in different location and in different groupings, I think that huge opportunity exists for the Bahamas. The one thing that we mustn't do, the one thing that we should not do at this point is become despondent, throw our hands up in the air and figure that we are going to hell in a basket. We have to remain positive. We have to stay strategic. We have to be fundamental and think about how we can grow this country back to strength and get to a place of resilience. And remember that in this process of doing that, we had some weaknesses. We need to address them. And when we address them, we build on top of those and we move forward. We think the opportunities are there for growth.
So great tips, Mr. Edwards. I would say that on camera, we're a bit formal. But if you were to give some advice to your family and friends about managing through this crisis, finding opportunities to grow your business, where the entrepreneurial activity is going to be focused at, what 3 tips would you give to your family and friends that we can share with the audience today?
Well, I would start at where I mentioned for the business persons. You have to be optimistic. You have to be positive. That's where you start. Every success starts in the mind. And if you already have a mindset which is negative and which is defeatist, you're going to fail. So start by conditioning the mind, by seasoning the mind that, look, you will do things, you will do great things, you will survive, and you will thrive. If you have resources at this point in time, I will use one of those old army saying, keep your powder dry. Keep your resources dry at this point. Do not make any rash or hasty type of a decision. Do not go into it with unthought out plans. So you want to be very strategic. You want to go into the new normal, if you may, in a way which says, I have sat down, I've looked at the landscape, and I am ready to move forward. But most importantly, what I would say to my family members, what I would say to my friends and colleagues, try to learn something new. Try to upgrade yourself. Try to think through what you're doing. If you had a business, think about how the business can be more flexible. Think how the business can be more strategic. Think about how you can leverage new channels of delivery, we have seen where curbside and persons coming up with new delivery businesses has kind of changed the face of business in this COVID environment. But whatsoever it is that you do at the end of the day, seek to become a earner of revenue and not only be dependent on employment or dependent on someone else. Because what this COVID crisis has shown us, that at the drop of a dime, all of that can go away. And the extent to which you have maybe multiple sources of revenue or you have some level of resilience in pivoting to someplace else is the extent to which you're going to survive and thrive. Bottom line, stay positive, plan, be strategic, and never give up. Stay true to your goals and make sure that you're always working towards finding something new. And if that fails, try something again. If that fails, try again. Never, absolutely never give up, because we are depending on you. The country is depending on you to be successful.
Wow. Try and try again. But Mr. Edwards, the question is, if somebody wanted to try and reach you, if they wanted your advice, if they wanted some deeper insight into managing their business or their personal affairs, how can they reach out to you in terms of your consultancy and tell the audience where best to find you?
Well, I'm easily found on social media. My consultancy is Next Level Solution. It's a small boutique for the time being. My intention is that one day it will become a household name and it will employ, multiple persons in multiple disciplines. Basically, Next Level Solution leverages the range of experiences I've had from public accounting to regulatory to banking and so on and so forth. So you can find me. My number is 376-8951. That's 376-8951. If you want to email, it's info@nlsolutionsbahamas.com, info@nlsolutionsbahamas.com. And our website is nlsolutionsbahamas.com. You can go and check us out there. We look at issues ranging from risk management, governance, compliance, finance. We do training, and we look at strategic issues. So, that's pretty much it for us. I am always readily available. I'm also on LinkedIn. If you search for Hubert Edwards on any social media, most social media platform, you will find me there. Also, we look forward to anyone who has a need or think that we can bring value to reach out. We say that our mantra is practical solutions deliver. And the whole idea is that we want to deliver solutions which are sustainable, which are workable, and which can help you to take your business to the next level. After all, that's our name. And it's not just a name. It's exactly how we want to interact with our clientele, with the persons who seek to use our services.
Thank you for that insight. And Mr. Edwards, with that, I'd like to thank you so much for being a guest on Make Sense and making sense of the economy. We hear it so often. We hear so much about the implications of the economy on our personal pockets and our ability to generate wealth and our ability to carry on. So I'd like to thank you so much on behalf of Making Sense and the RBNTV family for joining us today.
Certainly, it was a pleasure for being here. Thank you for inviting me. I look forward always to interactions like this, to the extent that the things that I've said can be of value to other individuals, then certainly it's a part of my contribution to not only the country, but to the wider region. And that's exactly how I think all of us should seek to live our lives. We should seek to contribute to the individual, to the business, to the country, and to the wider world of which we are citizens.
You're watching RBNTV. We are networking. Inspired by kingdom principles. They'll